you again. It's good to see you Thursday. Thank you so much for being like my rock star here. I always appreciate it. And Charlotte, I'm so glad that you came to join us today.
Well, thank you.
I will.
He tells lies.
Well, hopefully he didn't lie too much about this one, but we'll find out. So we're back for week 3 of A Food Lover's Paradise. Just for those of you who are joining, my name is Ethan. I will be your tour guide with the mostest today, at least the most hat.
We'll put it in the paper.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, as long as it's published. I'm a professional tour guide. Oh, yeah, microphone, yeah. Let's do that. This is a little bit better, yes?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, see, excellent. So, I am a tour guide, I am a teacher, and back at the beginning of all of this, Inspire asked me to come up with some tours of New York City that I could bring to you while we're all staying indoors. So, our game plan, as a reminder, is a day of iconic eating in New York City. 1 food and 1 eatery for 4 meals.
Wow.
Breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the most important meal of the day, which of course is dessert. Which is why clearly we're starting with dessert today with our babka and arugula there today. Yes, which is thumbs up is what I'm gathering. Yeah, A+. All right, awesome.
I've never had it before. It's so good.
What? Oh, okay. Well, and you're a native New Yorker, right? Oh my goodness. All right.
It's a vodka.
Sorry?
It's a vodka.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's and chocolate babka is the way to go.
It is.
So I like to start every day with a question because I like to get to know you all a little bit better. So today's question is a big one. How do you take your coffee? So, Mary Alice, do you take coffee?
Yes, I enjoy coffee. I take it with 2 little things of creamers.
Oh, 2 things of creamers.
Yes.
No sugar?
No, that is
Okay.
very highly addictive.
Okay.
And I'm here to prove it. Right next door to her.
Mm-hmm. There you go. Okay, so cream, no sugar.
No sugar. My daughter instilled that in me.
Oh, wow. All right. Okay, Charlotte, how do you take your coffee?
I throw it away.
You throw it away. Okay, so for breakfast, then what do you like to drink?
The coffee is too thick.
Okay.
It is too tense.
Mm-hmm.
It is bitter.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's perfect.
Okay. So, orange juice, do you
I'll
like
drink
tea? Okay, something sweet. Awesome. Thursday, you a coffee drinker?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So
Is that
I
the
take it with
cocoa?
sugar, and instead of cream, I use evaporated milk.
Ooh.
wow.
So that has a little bit of sweetness to it sometimes. Is
Not evaporated milk.
Okay.
You're thinking of
that
condensed milk.
Right, okay, yep.
Condensed milk is sweet.
Right.
It's a very Spanish thing.
Okay, cool.
I don't know why, but
Mhm.
I grew up in a Spanish household, so
Perfect.
they used evaporated milk.
Okay. To try some.
Yeah.
It sounds
Tastes
delicious,
good.
actually. Yeah, I bet. Amanda, coffee?
I love coffee,
Mm-hmm.
and I really love oat milk.
Okay.
Oat milk is like my new jam.
Okay.
It's so good.
Mm-hmm.
So I have some oat milk, and then there's like this creamer that has both coconut and almond milk in it. So I do like
Pour it in
a
together?
Yeah.
Oh, yum.
That sounds so good.
Uh-huh.
You can use her. You can use her.
I guess I can, yeah. I mean, okay, well, the only one who's doing a sweeter coffee today is maybe Charlotte and a little bit of Thursday.
Yeah.
I will be honest, you all have lovely coffee orders. I drink my coffee completely black. And you know the cart coffees that we get here, even though you're supposed to get it regular, right, with milk and sugar, I will take it that burnt, kind of like bitter black coffee. Oh, it just makes me so happy. But even though that's most people's breakfast drink, our breakfast today is a liquid breakfast because we're having a truly iconic New York City breakfast, the Bloody Mary.
Now, I would drink that.
Okay, great, I've got a winner, cool. How do you like your Bloody Marys? Do you like them spicy? Do you like them sweet?
I like it good.
You like them good, okay. And Mary Alice, what's your take?
I drink coffee with cream.
Coffee with cream, no Bloody Mary, thank you.
Correct.
Fair enough, all right. How about you, Bloody Mary drinkers? No?
Wait, I couldn't face it.
She drinks
Okay.
it.
I don't know why.
What is it you don't like about it?
Tomato.
Oh, the tomato. Okay,
Yeah.
well, see, that'll do it.
Like I love tomatoes, but not tomato juice.
Yeah, because it's got that, like,
I
It's
don't know
good.
what it is. It's that savory thing in the morning.
Mhm.
I just can't. I don't know what it is about the savory drink.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not the way to go.
Now, yeah.
I feel like that taste would just stick with you all morning.
It does.
You know?
It sticks around all day long. And weirdly, this is actually a New York City invention. 100%. The only reason we have a Bloody Mary is because of the town we're in. And it's because of, in a weird way, this guy. So his name was Ferdinand or Pete Petois.
Like my dad.
Hey, see, look at that. It's a good look.
Hi, Dad.
See, also losing his hair. So
He is.
we discussed earlier, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I hate to break it to you, Pete is not a New Yorker, he's actually French. But,
Oh, so now I'm from France.
see, your stock just went up.
Look.
Yeah. But he was working at a place called Henry's New York Bar, which looked like this in
We
Paris.
did for prescriptions.
Yes. Mhm.
Legitimate.
So Henry's New York Bar, this place is in Paris, but what it is an actual New York City bar. So around the end of the early 1900s, hello, you're welcome to come on in if you like. You're just in time. Yeah, no worries. So
You gonna ride that for us?
Not for you. Not for you.
So Henry's New York Bar was in the early 1900s. New Yorkers were going to Paris to go on vacation, and there was a gentleman whose name was Todd Sloan, who was a horse jockey, who thought the way that he could make all of his money would be to literally take a bar from New York City and put it in Paris. So he had Henry's New York Bar, which is this place, disassembled and brought over piece by piece and then recreated in Paris. Yeah. So this is an actual New York City bar. And around this time, Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald are coming to Paris, and all they want to do is drink. But in Paris, all we drink is wine, so you'll fit in well. But New Yorkers were primarily drinking cocktails. This was kind of a big question mark. So Pete is working behind the bar and starting to learn cocktail culture. He's trying to mix things together. And he gets introduced to vodka by Russians who are coming into Paris.
That's right.
See, exactly.
That's right.
You know,
Babka, borscht.
all that good. Speaking of, there's vodka to snack on. And so he starts to mess with this idea of mixing tomato juice and vodka, and he makes kind of the earliest version of a Bloody Mary. Then he decides he's done with Paris, and so he moves to the greatest city in the world, New York, and takes over as the head bartender at this place, which is the St. Regis Hotel.
Oh, my.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Not bad, Charlie, right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a step up in the world, right?
Yep.
And not only does he take over at the St. Regis, he just decides to go for the big time to their head bar, which is the Nat King Cole Bar. If you've ever been to the St. Regis, I'm sure you've had a drink here. He becomes the head bartender there, responsible for their whole cocktail menu, and he becomes the guru of cocktails in New York City. Everybody wants to learn from him. And while he's working there, he's got 17 bartenders under him, he invents a drink that's kind of like the Bloody Mary, that winds up being called the Red Snapper. And the Red Snapper, I want to get this right because it's a little different, is specifically a combination of tomato juice, vodka, citrus, and spices.
Sounds good.
It's pretty good, right? Yeah. The rumor is he wanted to call it the Bloody Mary.
The what?
Bloody Mary, yes. And he went to John Jacob Astor, who ran the hotel, and John Jacob Astor first did not drink, and second was very religious. And when he's religious. So he hears Bloody Mary and goes, oh, can't do that. On top of that, his wife's name was Mary, and he thought it would be a really bad idea to name a drink Bloody Mary after his wife. Because, you know, that will get you in trouble pretty fast, right? On the way home.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the Red Snapper is born.
I'll grab another fork.
But, I'm sorry? Yeah.
Napkins, please?
Yeah. So he gets his Red Snapper going, but as all this is going on, the idea of a brunch drink, you know, something we have for breakfast, really comes about. Oh, right, and then we get our very first write-up of the recipe, which is in the Crosby Gage's Cocktail Guide, and my favorite part, Ladies' Companion. And the idea was that in the early 1930s, if you were a lady of society, you would keep the lady's companion next to you so that if a gentleman invited you to have a drink, you'd know everything that was in it and you could make the appropriate choice. So this was your like alcoholic handbook that everyone kept a hold of. But then we get to brunch.
To what?
Brunch. Drinking our drink for breakfast.
Okay.
See? This is when it gets confusing, right? Because why are we drinking hard alcohol for breakfast? Well, it's because of this guy,
Oh, George.
George Jessel. Yeah, you know him, right?
Mhm.
Have you heard of George Jessel?
Of course.
Of course.
I'm old enough.
I know. Did you like George Jessel? Yes, no?
I don't remember.
No, that's okay. I mean, I think he's pretty impressive. I don't know Thursday what your take was on him.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, he was a comedian and a very hard drinker.
A hard drink.
Oh yeah. Lots of sauce. And so, in the mid-1930s, he goes on a drinking rampage in Miami, Florida. And when he wakes up, he needs a drink in the morning to, settle his nerves. So, he goes to the bartender and says, "Give me something." And the bartender was worried about him. So, he mixed tomato juice and vodka together and handed him an early Bloody Mary. And George thought it was the best thing in the world. So when he came back to New York City, he went to his favorite bar and basically said, "Hey, you gotta make me this thing. It's pretty fantastic." That shows up, and suddenly the Red Snapper and the Bloody Mary you got competing drinks here in New York.
Oh,
So everyone wonders, how does this go down? Well, it turns out that George might actually have been the source of this thing, because in a New Yorker magazine article in 1964, our buddy Pete, remember the guy from Paris, announces that he actually learned it from George Jessel. So George is the true source of the Bloody Mary. Now, today, I think a Bloody Mary is delicious by itself, right? You just put some vodka in, some juice in, that's fine. But most of the Bloody Marys I see on the market don't look like this. They look a little bit more like this. And I just think this is a little bit excessive, right? This is too much. We don't need all of that.
Right.
Yeah, but, so if this is not your idea of the ideal brunch breakfast drink, if you want a good Bloody Mary today, the spot to go to is the 21 Club.
Oh,
Mhm.
that's right.
Have you been?
Familiar. Steven, look at the picture. Remember that?
Did you go, Esther, or no?
Steven, did you go to the 21 Club? Yes, he was
Yeah.
everywhere.
What brought you to the 21 Club? Business? Yes, this was a businessman's hangout. Either of you familiar with the 21 Club? No? All right. Well,
He's from Chicago, what does she know?
this is a hot spot in New York City. Lots of people go here. I don't know, for my New Yorker, native New Yorkers, ever make it to the 21 Club?
Not with those jockeys in front. I just graciously decline for
Yes.
other reasons.
Absolutely. No question.
Do they still even have those?
They're still up
They're
front,
still
yeah.
up-
They're
yeah, I
still
was
up
like-
front.
41st, 42nd?
It's on 53rd
50, yeah.
Street.
On
It's on 53rd Street,
Yeah,
yeah.
like Madison.
So this is a kind of a classic New York City, spot. The home of the Bloody Mary, and we have it because of these two guys, Jack Kriegler and Charlie Burns. Now they were cousins who wanted to make money to go to night school. So while your parents were making you work to go through college, right? Their parents were making them do the same thing in the early 1920s. And of course, in the early 1920s, Prohibition. I know you weren't around for that, but we can imagine. Prohibition, right?
Don't be naughty.
But I tell you, there are some countries where people are still going to school to pay for their college.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. But what they realized was that the easiest way for them to make a little extra cash was to start running booze. So they started illegal booze operations in New York and created a bar in the East Village called the Redhead. And this was the underground spot that you went for your alcohol, right? And it was so successful that they opened up 2 locations, but then got shut down in 1926 when the subway came into Washington Square. So they said, okay, great. We're still making money, we paid off night school. You know where we're gonna go? We're gonna go to 49th Street, and we're gonna have the best speakeasy in all of New York City. And this goes great until 1929, when Rockefeller Center opens, and they get the land taken out from under them. So they know New Year's Eve, 1929 is going to be their last big hurrah. So they throw a massive party, just a like tear down the walls kind of thing. They wind up making so much noise and getting so much attention that the police get called on them to break up this thing. So Jack and Charlie knew that this was coming. They had already bought a townhouse on the Upper East Side, so they get all of their revelers to pull the gates off of the building and march them all the way up the street to 53rd.
Street,
Sorry?
on 53rd?
Yep, all the way up 5th Avenue to 53rd Street.
That goes up down.
And the gates get thrown right in front of this townhouse. And these are the original gates from that spot on 49th Street.
So that is opening gate, yep.
That whole gate was just original, got dragged up by a bunch of drunken New Year's Eve revelers, which we've all seen in this town, right? But this didn't solve our alcohol problem, right? It's still the mid-1930s, booze is still illegal here in the United States. So, thankfully, Jack and Charlie had great relationships. They could get you all the good booze. They would actually throw it in the hoods of cars that were driving up from Mexico, and their doorman and his sister would pose as a newlywed couple in order to smuggle in booze through the front door in their jackets. And this was all going fine until they made not great friends with this guy, Walter Winchell. Yes. Charlie, you know him, right?
You can dig.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you know Walter Winchell?
Now, do you know Walter Winchell, Mary Alice?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes, okay. So he is the gossip columnist with the most, and he gets banned from the 21 Club. So in retaliation, he writes a scathing review in the paper, basically wondering why this place that's running all this illegal alcohol has never been shut down. And the day after it runs, boom, they get raided by the police. Now, they were able to work their way out of this, but it caused them to get a little more creative with their alcohol. So they installed an underground wine cellar. So let me just show you, so this is the wall, okay? This wall is about a foot thick, okay? They cut through the wall and they created this sort of internal lock thing. Now, the only way to get in here is very specific. You see this skewer right here? This is a shrimp skewer, you know, that you would grill shrimp on, throw them on there. There's a hole in the door, and to open this up, you take your shrimp skewer and you poke it at a 90-degree angle, poof, it opens up the lock, and you're in to this area. And to hide it, sorry?
You're into the bank.
Yeah, except the bank is all wine. You'd love it, right? Yeah. So, all of this is here, and to really hide it, they hang slabs of meat in front of the door. So now no one can see this. And they continuously had police, you know, knocking on the door.
Sure.
But that doesn't...
So like that,
Sorry?
like that.
Like that. Yeah, exactly. Gimme, and we'll just ignore you, right? But then once you get in the front door, if everyone's drinking, there's a problem. So they take it one step further, and they install basically a trap door setup to just make all of the alcohol disappear. So this is an early 20s picture. If you take a look at all of these like slats that are above there, those were their booze shelves. And if they heard that the police were coming, they had a little emergency button they could push, which would cause all of these to flip up and drop the alcohol down to the basement. And if you had a bottle of wine, there were slots all throughout this area where you could just stamp it down, something would open up, and you would shoot it straight down to the basement.
And that's how my father found me.
There you go. Well, this is where I knew you were gonna like this one, right? So, all that's gone except for the basement, because you can't get rid of that. And in 1933, we get to drink again in the United States. Prohibition is repealed. Charlie and Jack get a presidential pardon for all of their misdeeds, and the 21 Club blows up and becomes the celebrity hangout all throughout the 30s.
Frank, he looks pretty good.
I know, not bad, right? You get Marilyn, you get Jackie, all sorts of famed folks. They have a really famous room in the back that is covered with toys.
This one.
Covered with toys that are hanging from the ceiling. See, there's airplanes and there's trucks and things.
Oh, I see.
Was this a room you get a chance to see, sir? No?
You don't remember that?
This one was a little bit harder to get into. You had to have a VIP reservation. And it started because people were having a few too many drinks and were getting into fights about who had the coolest trinkets. And so they just started signing them and leaving them on the ceiling to kind of show off. And the 21 Club for the longest time actually had a dress code. So I would not be allowed in right now as I am dressed. You had to have a jacket and a tie if you were a man, and you had to be in appropriate cocktail attire if you were a lady. So if someone would like to explain to me what that is,
I was gonna ask you.
no clue, no clue. But that requirement for the neckties for men went away in 2000 and, I wrote it down because I'm so bad at dates, 2009. Yes, 2009 is when it went away. But the rest of the places pretty much stayed the same, including their wine cellar in the basement, which still has the private collections from Richard Nixon and Elizabeth Taylor. Their wines are still down there. You can go say hi.
Oh, what are they saving them for?
I don't know. For you,
Ask them.
right? For you, probably.
Do they have tours?
Mhm.
Going in?
And actually, you can go. They now have their whole basement wine cellar actually has a table set up, so you're able to like reserve a private dining room area in there.
Oh, that's cool.
It only costs about $7,500 just for the reservation, and then you pay for food on top of it. But you know,
Did you ever?
these are reasonable
Did you
options.
ever,
right?
she said.
Me? No. I mean, you know, if you'd like to come, maybe we can talk about that. But
Well, okay, another day.
another day, yeah. So, but then we get back to George, because the place where George Jessel took his new Bloody Mary recipe was the 21 Club. He introduced it to their bartender, whose name was Henry Zinkowitz. It's spelled so weird I needed to write it down for myself. And Zinkowitz decided that he was going to perfect this thing, which is why he probably gave it to Pete. Now, you could get a Bloody Mary to go up until about March of this year, because even though the 21 Club was officially closed because of the pandemic, they were still doing to-go cocktails like you could do here, so you could still get it. Unfortunately, March of 2021, the whole place shut down. They actually laid off all of their staff.
They should have saved that.
These are still up. They haven't actually taken anything down. They just closed the restaurant. So we're waiting to find out if they're going to reopen. They're teasing that they might have something for us in the fall. But for the moment, the 21 Club is a casualty of the pandemic. But still, the home of a half-decent Bloody Mary. You know, whatever you need.
Can you explain what these figures are?
So these are jockeys, like horse riding jockeys, and they were donated by jockeys that were coming to have drinks there. This whole place is fully decorated by people just leaving their junk there. I mean, literally, all of these were put up because someone didn't want them and they thought it would be fun to have it displayed. All the toys on the inside were junk someone didn't want and thought would be fun displayed. Most of the pictures on the inside are pictures of people's faces that they just wanted to put up on the wall. So, it's a weird place.
Yeah.
It's a strange spot. But that was breakfast.
What, we haven't finished eating yet?
No, I hope you're hungry because we got to get to lunch, which is pastrami on rye.
Well, you better hurry up.
I know. So I hope I've got pastrami fans today. I know Ron had asked for this last week, so I wanted to make sure that this one came in. Do you, pastrami fan? Do you like pastrami?
I had it only once at the Lower East Side and it was fantastic.
Okay, well that's a rousing
What was the
endorsement.
name of the place? A Jewish restaurant, deli, whatever it's
Katz's
called.
Deli?
Probably.
Probably.
That's where the movie was.
Yes, that it is where the movie was. Yes, yes, absolutely. Well, pastrami
It's really amazing.
on rye. This meat is only New York. It comes from the Middle East. It's actually originally something called pasterma, which is a dried out meat that looks kind of like this. It was saddle food in the Middle East. So if we're historically in the Middle East, or parts of where would be Israel and Jordan and Syria and all that area today, I would have pressed meat that I would just have hanging up the side of my saddle, and if I got hungry, I'd pull it up and I'd take a chunk of a bite out of it. And this
Going to dinner.
kind of, well, yeah, there you go.
That's it, forget it.
I know, done, right? This worms its way, and today, this is traditionally Turkish. When I was looking into pictures of pastrama today, this is from Turkey, so you can see Turkish lira there. So really traditional Turkish food today that made its way into Romania, where Romanian Jews kind of discovered this and made it their own. And historically, you would make this out of goose. So this would be the outside of the shop selling all your pasterma. You've got your geese, and then you've got your meat in the back. But when Jewish immigrants start coming to the United States, especially from Romania, there are no geese here. Like eating goose in the United States, I mean, you could go to Central Park and find some Canadian ones that you might want to, tell to shove off. But goose was not a big part of the American diet. But you know what was? Beef. And so Jewish Romanian immigrants took this idea of dried out meat and started to build on this pasterma that's made out of beef. And they start curing it and drying it and brining it. But they still sell it in stores as pasterma. It's still this Romanian food that's coming over. And so that's great. So how do we go from pasterma to pastrami, right? You see where I'm going. This is an old school Jewish deli that was selling, that's pasterma that they've got there. You can see it's a little bit more dried out. The reason we got into the pastrami situation was because of these salamis. Because Italian and German and Jewish immigration happened at about the same time. And you would have a Jewish deli next to an Italian deli. And so someone would go into one and they would get their pastrami, and then someone would go into another and they would get their pasterma. And suddenly the word pastrami, pasterma, salami, pasterma, pastrami just kind of morphs into what this is. And that's where we get those. But we still are not doing it on bread. We're still just eating the meat, exactly what your dinner is. Grab it, take a hunk out of it, right? So how do we get to the sandwich? It's because of this guy. His name is Sussman Volk, and he is an Orthodox Jew, but he is not from Romania, he's from Lithuania. And he makes friends with a very famous Romanian butcher who basically says, can you hold on to some of my meat for the weekend while I go away and visit my family? And he says, sure. And as a thank you, the Romanian guy gives Sussman his family secret pastrami recipe. And Sussman goes, this is great. I am never selling anything again. I am only making pastrami, and I want to sell it by the slice. So he invents the idea of a deli. So now you can not only get your slices of meat, but you also have a place to sit and eat them while you're relaxing and making friends. But Sussman also does not want to pay for plates because he thought they would cost too much. So he starts experimenting with putting the pastrami between two slices of bread and determines that rye tastes the best. And thus, we get pastrami on rye. And this blows up. Everyone on the Lower East Side is eating pastrami on rye. Jewish delis are the place to go. By the time we get to the late 1800s, early 1900s, there are 1,500 Jewish delis on the Lower East Side.
Wow.
You tripped over them as you were going down the street. This was the only food that you ate there. Today, there aren't that many left. There's probably
Is
only
Katz still
one.
open?
Yeah, it's Katz's. This is basically the last one
It's
left.
a special way when you walk in, you give them a receipt, or if they're going out, and
They give you the ticket, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
The ticket. So you've only been once, yes?
Yes.
What did you have? Do you remember?
Pastrami.
Well, clearly, but did you have anything else?
I don't think so.
No?
This is not my cup. My stomach doesn't.
It doesn't sit well with that? Okay.
Well, they're huge.
They're-
The pastrami sandwiches that they have.
Yeah, you can
And they're
share
like
them.
$20.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you're a pastrami?
Yeah, they actually opened one downtown Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Oh.
That happened pretty recently, didn't it?
Yes, when they opened up the big mall,
Mm-hmm.
they opened up a Katz downtown
Oh,
Brooklyn.
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it was the first time they'd ever actually moved out of this iconic location, because this is where everything started. Charlotte, I gotta ask, Katz's? Have you been?
Of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
What did you, what,
Walked all the way down there.
and all the way back? It's a long trip.
Probably didn't make it back.
Well, it's probably good to take a cab. Have you been, Mary Alice?
No, I haven't.
No? Okay, well this is one to put on the
Wow,
list.
place.
Because it is probably, I think, as far as I can tell, this is the last old school Jewish deli that is left in New York City. This is the last one of its kind. And it actually did not start as Katz's, it started as Iceland's. Because in 1888, the two people who started it were named Morris and Hyman Iceland. And they were Jewish immigrants who'd come over. They jumped on this craze of Jewish delis. They got a little shop kind of on Ludlow Street down in the Lower East Side. Not a really nice place, nothing this big at all. And it started to pick up in the early 1900s when Wally Katz joined in. And Wally Katz was a bit of a businessman, and knowing how much he wanted this to be his legacy on the Lower East Side, he got the place renamed to Katz's and Iceland. So there's Wally right there. So he picks up, the Iceland brothers decide that they're not interested in this business anymore. They sell the whole thing to Katz, and Katz opens up the very first of the ones that we know today just as Katz's on the other side of the street from where Katz's is today.
Nobody.
Yeah. So you got like the road here. Katz's today is over here. The first one was over here. He runs this thing really successfully. He starts to make a lot of money. He keeps it in the family. And then they decide to put the F train, the subway, in New York City. And where do they need to go? Right through Katz's. So they buy out the building. And with the amount of money he does, Katz buys the building on the other side of the street and opens the Katz's location that we know today. This is going back to sort of the early 50s. And it was around the time that Katz's opened up, Yiddish theater was what you went to see in New York if you were a Jewish immigrant. It was a whole ecosystem like that, almost parallel Broadway. And most of it was done on the Lower East Side. And the place to hang out after a show was Katz's. This is where the stars went. This is where everyone got a bite afterwards. And so it became this sort of popular like Jewish actor hangout. And the local neighborhood would always join on Friday for Franks and Beans, which they still do today, which is still their classic, right? And that's how that tradition started. But it was still not something that was well known in New York City until we hit World War II. And the Katz family had a really strong tradition of whenever anyone was traveling, they would always send you with food, because you don't want to be hungry, right? And so with all of these our people in the armed forces going overseas, the matriarch of the family, whose name was Rose, started a little marketing campaign that some of you might be familiar with, which was, send a salami to your boy in the army. So, classic New York accent there, but what they actually would do is they would take orders from people who had family members who were overseas, and then they would ship bulk salamis overseas to wherever these folks were stationed on behalf of New Yorkers. This is still in their window today, and you can still technically do this at Katz's. If you have a family member in the armed services, they will send Katz's to them, just in case you need them. So it went through the Katz family. The Katz family decided to sell it in the 80s. It then moved over to the Dell family, who are now owners. And the guy who runs the place today is this guy. His name is Jake Dell. He's 33 years old. And he gets charge of the place, and he looks at what's happening at Katz's, and he decides to make absolutely no changes at all. He says, this thing is working the way it's going, we're not touching anything. They own the building, so there's no way to get rid of it unless they try and put a subway through it. And he kept literally everything the same. The recipes are the same that go all the way back to the Iceland family. They have not changed any of that. Same matzo ball soup, same pastrami, all of that.
Smart fella, huh?
Yeah, he's pretty good for a 33-year-old.
That's what I remember.
The cards, right? Yeah. So I looked at the cards because these are the same going all the way back to the early 1910s when he first opened up his first location across the street. All of these prices would have actually made sense in the year 1910. All of those numbers would have some logic behind them. Today, you just have to know. So if you work at Katz's, you'll learn what a 250 is or what a 110 is. It makes no sense. And then when you add it all up, they just know what these numbers are. It's like a whole other kind of math.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing that's changed though is that if it was 1910 and I lost my card at Katz's, they would charge me 15 cents. Today, they will charge you $50. So don't lose your card. Don't lose it, okay?
Wow.
So I do have to say though, Dell, while Katz's, as we know, is the same as it was, Jake did make two changes. the first thing was he opened up that Brooklyn location, right? And that was the first time they'd had a secondary location, and he kept the menu pretty small, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, the sandwiches are smaller now.
Yeah, it's not the
Yeah.
same. He
No,
kind of
it's
reduced
not.
everything just a little bit. The
Yeah.
idea being that they don't make the food there. Everything gets made at Katz's on the Lower East Side and then trucked to Brooklyn every day.
Oh.
And they wanted to keep the consistency of the quality. But the other thing was they started doing mail order. And now you can actually get pastrami on rye shipped anywhere in the world with 24 hours notice.
Oh, wow.
And that is the thing that kept them, that made them get through the pandemic, because all of a sudden everyone needed their pastrami on rye, and so they were shipping all over the place. To the point where I was actually able to send my mother pastrami on rye, who lives in the Midwest, for her birthday.
Wow.
So that's Katz's, a classic that's, you know, New York City, and I'm glad I've got more pastrami on rye fans here. And I hope you're not full. No?
What's my offer?
Well, I got dinner for you. I don't know, let's see. Here's what's for dinner. Italian. Yeah?
I would take it,
You take it, okay. What kind of Italian food do you like?
pretty much all of it.
All of it? Okay, awesome.
My tummy's not big enough.
Well, you know, the portions are pretty large, yeah? Mary Alice, do you have a favorite Italian?
Oh, no, I like just about all of it.
Just about all of it? Awesome. Esther, how about you?
Probably everything.
Everything? Okay.
You know, I eliminate now the pasta, so it can be chicken,
Okay.
piccata, you know, stuff like that.
There's lots of options, right? There's plenty of options there. Well, I thought I would go with a classic and also a traditional New York City food, spaghetti and meatballs. Yeah. Now, I know you told me you're from Youngstown, Ohio, right? This has a New York City source, but a very specific Ohio connection. Okay? So get ready, because you guys had a major part in this. So let's be clear, this is not Italian. If you meet someone from Italy, do not offer them a spaghetti and meatballs. They will just make fun of you, okay? This is not Italian food.
Oh.
Because it's three things. It's spaghetti, which we all know, right? It's meatballs, which we also know, and it's red marinara sauce, okay? So let's do all three. The meatballs, probably...
Swedish?
Sorry?
Swedish?
Swedish, no, Middle Eastern, believe it or not, yeah. Kofta, which are those,
Yeah.
they're also kind of Turkish, and you'll get them in other parts of the Middle East,
Right,
were the source of balled up meat,
right.
and they made their way to Italy. But in Italy, they don't look like that, they look like this. These are poupette, if you've ever had these guys. They're little guys, right? Have you had Italian wedding soup, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah,
Have
they're
you had
teeny tiny.
teeny tiny little guys, right? So they're these tiny little balls, and they're made out of either fish or chicken.
No kidding.
That's it. And the reason that all of these Italian meatballs are super, super tiny is because in Italy, meat was ridiculously expensive in the 1800s. So you were spending about 75% of your money on food, so it was wildly expensive. And because meat was even more expensive, they were always had little breadcrumbs in them. You can see these guys have little flecks of things in there to try and beef it up. And then as Italians start coming to the United States, they realize that all of a sudden food is way cheaper here. And instead of spending 75% of their budget on food, they're only spending about 25% of their budget on food. So now, the meatballs go from being these tiny little things to being basically baseball-sized. They just keep growing and growing and growing, and beef gets added to the whole situation. And the American version of a meatball goes from this to like that, okay? So that's how we get to meatballs. Great. The sauce is a problem too, right? Because the sauce that we have on there is known as a marinara sauce, right? We all know marinara. And if you think about that in Italian, marinara actually becomes sauce of mariners or sailor sauce. Because marinara sauce is only made with canned tomatoes. So if you're a sailor on a boat, you don't want to keep fresh produce, you just have your canned tomatoes, you mash them up, and you mix it together to create this like marinara traditional red sauce, right? And most of the people who were coming over from Italy mostly had access to Italian canned tomatoes, so this became the staple. And then we add in pasta, which we all know, right? Comes when you boil it in a pot, right? But the first time we get spaghetti and meatballs doesn't actually come from Italian Americans, it comes from this woman. Her name is Juliet Corson. I love her glasses, for the record. And she is not Italian at all. She actually is a journalist in the New York Times. And she writes the Frugal Eater column in the Times. And she's been meeting Italian immigrants and saying, you know, they do this really cool thing where they make spaghetti and this red sauce and meatballs on top of it. It's a really inexpensive way to feed a family. So she's the first person who proposes it. And then it gets written up in American Cookery, which was the cookbook of American foods going into the 1930s. And as we cross into the early 20s and 30s, Italian Americans start making restaurants. So checkered tablecloths, the whole bit, right? But most of the people who are going to Italian restaurants are not Italian Americans. They are everybody else. And most of them are British and Dutch immigrants. And if you know anything about British food, right, it is a steak and a potato. That's what you eat, meat and starch. So you had all of these Americans who were used to British and Dutch diets showing up and saying, where's my starch? I need something. So Italian restaurant owners started putting the pasta underneath the red sauce and the meatballs in order to appease clients who are coming in, and thus we get spaghetti and meatballs. But it was only really popular in New York until this guy showed up. Chef Boyardee. Familiar with him?
Yes.
Once or twice?
Oh, my childhood.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
So Mary Alice, this is where it comes to you, because he was an Italian chef named Chef Boyardee, not Chef Boyardee, which is how we grew up saying him, who was in Ohio.
Oh.
And he introduced Italian food to Ohio. And he got really popular because he would teach cooking classes. And the big deal for him was that he would actually give you a doggy bag of supplies that you could take home with you so that you could make it yourself. So if you took a class with Chef Boyardee, you would get a little baggie at the end that would have pasta, it would have canned tomatoes, it would have meat that you could ball up. And people throughout the Midwest and throughout the western part of the United States fell in love with all of this. They thought it was the greatest thing ever. And Chef Boyardee made so much money doing this that he decided, well, why don't I just cook it and can it? It's even easier than you having to do the work. And suddenly Chef Boyardee becomes the way that most people get their spaghetti and meatballs. So New York invented it, but Ohio made it nationwide famous. So thank you, Ohio. But if you're gonna do spaghetti and meatballs in New York, I want you to have the best. So we're going to the hardest ticket restaurant in all of New York. We're going to Rayo's.
The best.
Have you been?
I have not been in the rest. My husband has, but
Mm.
we order from them, and of course, there's nothing but Rayo's in my house.
Oh, naturally,
Yeah.
for the sauces and all
Yeah.
of that stuff.
It
Yeah.
really is by far the best jar. If you're gonna buy sauce, that's it right there.
Oh,
Yeah.
so you buy the sauce there. It's
Yeah.
not a restaurant. You buy
It is a restaurant.
It is I think it's the hardest table in New York as well.
It is because it's small. It's very small.
Yep.
It's incredibly difficult
Mhm.
to get a table.
Yeah.
But you can order.
Yeah, and they've been doing takeout, I think.
Yeah, they've been doing takeout.
Have you done takeout during
Yeah.
the pandemic? How was it?
It's excellent. Their
Yeah.
food is excellent.
No, it's incredible. Well, it is, I think they only have 10 tables, if
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And they sell them as like a timeshare. So you get Tuesday or Wednesday,
Exactly.
but once you get in, right, the table is yours all night, if I'm not mistaken.
So I'm sure it was.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
I never got a chance to
Right,
do any
yeah.
of those business dinners. but-
Right. Well, the only way to get there at this point is to know someone who knows someone who knows someone. So whoever here knows someone, you let Tuesday and I know, because I want in real
Yeah.
quick.
She knows someone that.
Yeah, clearly, you're the
Yeah.
one, you're our best connection here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Rayo's is like this iconic location. It also is tied up in the mob a little bit because you can't do a old school Italian restaurant without a little bit of mob connections. But it actually started originally from this let me just make sure that I don't screw his name up. From Charles Rayo, who shows up in New York City in 1896. He's an Italian immigrant from southern Italy, and he doesn't go into the restaurant business first, he goes into the bar restaurant. So he buys a bar on 114th and Pleasant, which is where Rayo's is today.
Mhm.
This is his original bar right here. This is, and if you take a look here, it says Earhart, which is a brewery. So what he had was an old school Italian-American saloon in sort of what was at that point an Italian-American section of Harlem today. So you have a bunch of Italian immigrants hanging out there. And while Rayo's today is like swanky, this place was disgusting, okay? The way they didn't have glasses, so you had to bring your own if you wanted beer. And if you wanted it to go, they would have you put it in a tin pail, pour it in there, and then you could take it out with you, okay? But he makes a ton of money doing this. It's like a great blue-collar hangout spot. And then Prohibition happens. And the Italian Americans still want their wine, so he calls all of his Italian American friends. They start making wine and putting it in big vats in the basement that have a tube attached to it, and he'll sell you a bottle of wine for $1. You in? Yeah? So it's this hot, like, drunken nightlife spot that kind of shows up in Harlem and is a little weird. And then as the family keeps moving, they decide offering food would be a good idea. And as the neighborhood continues to be kind of an Italian-American hangout, they start selling steak. But as more Italian Americans start getting interested in this place, the family realizes they can capitalize on their family restaurant. And in the 1970s, after they've taken over their corner location, Anne Pellegrino Rayo shows up. She's the matriarch of the family. I mean, just look at her, right? With the glasses and the cigarette in the holder there. She means business, right? She is friends with all of the Italian Americans living in the neighborhood, and that means she's in with the mob. And she realizes she can make a ton of money basically serving Italian food here. So they start bringing out the family restaurant, and they start trying to gain interest. She gets her family member, whose name is Frank Pellegrino Jr., who wanted to be an actor and a singer, and he takes the job of the doorman, and they start inviting people in. The New York Times comes, writes them up, gives them a glowing review, and suddenly none of the regulars can get in. The place is just packed. So now they start selling off tables. You would buy a share in there, and you'd get Tuesday at 7 o'clock. That's your table, and you get to stay there as long as you want, but that's your day, that's your table. Today, they've got about 53 shares left, and the only way to get in is to know someone, to buy their share from them, or to get something at a charity auction, which is the other way that they do it. And the place is still packed, it's crowded. And it is like one of those like society hangouts. Every single United States president has dined here except for President Obama. And Joe Biden hasn't yet, but he's probably on his way, I'm sure. And even though it's like this like hot spot, it still has plenty of mob connections. There are two very notable incidents that happened there. One was an arson that happened in 1995, and the family will say nothing about it, so who knows what happened. The other thing that happened there was a shooting in 2003 that happened over music on the jukebox. Someone had had a little bit too much, they got into a fight over what was playing, and there was a mob shooting. So they are pretty low to the ground about what's happening in there, and it's still sort of the hottest ticket in town. And unfortunately, Frank, who was the gentleman at the front door, died in 2017, but the family has continued running the place, and they have stayed basically all the same since then. They still do the same family recipes, they still have all the same Christmas decorations up, and they'll still give you massive sized meatballs, and if you ask very nicely, they'll put spaghetti underneath it for you.
What is the address?
It is 117th, I want to say, and Pleasant. I want to make sure
It's
that I got it.
below, I think,
Or 114th. Is
Yeah.
it 114th? Yes,
Yeah.
114th and Pleasant.
114 what?
114th Street and Pleasant Avenue. So it's up and over.
But it's in the Harlem?
Yes, so it's uptown on First Avenue, off of First Avenue.
Why did it
It's you won't see it on, it's such a little nook.
Yeah, it's just
Because
sort of
you
disappears.
walk past it and
Yep.
you wouldn't even know it was there.
Yeah, it's this little magical spot that's
Yeah,
still
it really
there.
is.
which is
117 and First Avenue?
114.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
First Avenue?
Yeah,
Yes.
Pleasant.
I
Yeah.
always pass there.
Well, here's the thing. Good luck getting a reservation.
Yeah.
And if you find out how to do it, you let us know.
Yeah.
So that, or we'll just have to ask. We'll put it.
I know, I'll have to ask my husband how he gets in there. It's business, but you know, it's
Of
all.
course,
yeah,
that's
corporate,
always
so.
what it is, right?
He dresses like a woman.
Well, that's probably another way to do it. So we got one more spot, because of course we have to have dessert. We're having egg creams.
Ooh.
Egg creams. Do you know this one?
No, but it looks delicious.
It does look delicious, doesn't it?
Egg cream's a sucker for.
For anything that's sweet and frothy. Have you had these? No?
Stephen, did you have egg cream?
No, not one, but you've had it,
Yeah.
right? And did you grow up with
No,
these,
I've,
Amanda?
I've never
No,
had.
okay, so this is classic New York City dessert. So we'll do it together. What's in them?
I have no idea.
Oh, really?
I have no idea.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's what's in it.
Let's drink
So it's called an egg cream, right? Egg cream. So what would make sense?
Egg.
Egg and
Creamy.
cream. No, neither of those
No.
things. Okay, here's what's in an egg cream. Seltzer
Oh,
water,
it's seltzer water.
that's right.
milk, and Fox's You Bet syrup. Specifically, Fox's You Bet syrup, okay? You can't have Hershey's syrup, you can't have anything else. It has to be Fox's You Bet syrup in order to be a traditional egg cream. So that's how that works. So here's the thing, we know it's New York, but we don't know a ton about where egg creams came from. The person we think invented it, or at least got us to it, was this guy named Boris Tomaszewski, famous Yiddish performer. You've heard of him, I said, yeah?
It's yes.
Yes, yes, like, you seem like,
Yeah, it's in there in
Yeah.
all my theater.
right, so he was a legend of Yiddish theater on the Lower East Side. He was like the biggest star, and he was one of the Yiddish theater performers who toured all over the world. So he visited Paris and had chocolat et crème, or chocolate and cream, which is a beverage that you have. And he says, oh, this is great, and he comes back to New York City and starts asking for it. And that is the first legend of where the egg cream comes from. The more likely legend is from a candy store that looked like this, run by a man named Louis Oster. Now this was on the corner of 2nd Avenue and 7th Street in the Lower East Side. And he had candy way in the back. The name has been officially lost to history. And he started mixing and matching. And if you weren't going to Katz's, his candy store was where you'd go after a show to get a little treat, just a little snack afterwards. So he is where the egg cream likely came from. And Mr. Oster had a special recipe for his chocolate syrup. And people who write about this say it was like the most incredible chocolate syrup you'll ever taste in the world. And he knew it was good and wanted to hold on to it. And in fact, he was approached by a candy company, a very famous ice cream and candy company that starts with an H and ends with an Hershey's, who basically tried to buy his recipe from him and lowballed him, gave him too little money. And so he is not going to take it. He said absolutely not, refused to reveal it to anyone, including his family, and took it with him. So we have no idea what his original chocolate tasted like, but apparently it was like the greatest in the world. So today, when you make an egg cream, you need to be using that good You Bet, okay? Fox's You Bet. This is a really specific chocolate that comes from Brownsville, Brooklyn. And it was made by the Fox family that lived there in the early 1900s. The name You Bet came from a little expedition they made to Texas, where they worked on oil fields and would hear all the oilmen saying, "You bet, hey, you bet, hey, you bet." They made no money doing it, but they got a great name for their chocolate syrup. But in New York, around the 1800s and early 1900s, every single neighborhood, whether you were in Manhattan, in the Bronx, Queens, wherever, had their own little chocolate syrup specialty store. And so whatever neighborhood you went to would have their own kind of flavor of chocolate. And this is the only one that has survived. So it's a little bit more floral, it's a little bit saltier, but it's really, really delicious. And so You Bet kind of takes over. It was the last of the remaining ones. But I've had egg creams all over the country, and the best ones happen here in New York. And the reason is you need to get the seltzer right out of the spigot. And there aren't too many places left doing egg creams today. And unfortunately, my favorite egg cream spot just closed. I know.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Jem Spa.
Oh, that's on St. Mark's. Yeah.
This is in the Lower East Side. It's on St. Mark's and 2nd Avenue.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. 2nd Avenue, right? Yeah, 2nd Avenue.
Second.
Yeah, 2nd Avenue. So this place, this was like the mecca of egg creams for such a long time. It just closed. It started as a t-shirt store, not selling any candy at all, until it moved into this candy making, and they started making egg creams. And notably, they were about 2 blocks away from our buddy Louis Oster. And there are some stories that there was like an egg cream war up and down the 2nd Avenue because everybody had their preferred chocolate syrup, and you would like fight for who had the best egg cream. And the place wasn't too terribly successful. It kind of didn't really pick up until the early 1920s. And in the early 1920s, they renamed themselves from the chain t-shirt store to Gems Spa.
Wow, that place has been around forever.
It's
I
been
had
around
no
literally
idea.
forever.
I had no idea.
It's been around forever, but Gems
Wow.
Spa, and the reason it is Gems Spa, and again, I gotta make sure that I get this right or else someone in history is gonna go after me. Gem was an acronym for the 2 husbands who shared, the 2 people who owned it, their wives and one of their ex-wives. So Gems actually stands for Gladys, Etta, and Miriam.
You had to put all the ex-wives.
Exactly. You don't want to offend anybody, right? Exactly. Because we know, never piss off the wives. So they mostly sold newspapers, they mostly sold candy, they sold a lot of Yiddish newspapers, they sold a lot of foreign language newspapers, until the 1960s when the Village Voice really took over. And then it goes from this cute little spot to this hippie spot. So this is when you get Maplethorpe and all our classic like hippies of New York, the counterculture era. And as counterculture kind of goes away in the 1970s, Gem Spa goes away too. Closes for a couple years. It gets opened up by an Italian man, and then until it closed, was run by this guy whose name is Ray Patel, who is an East Indian, so India, like subcontinent India, American immigrant, who learned to make egg creams from the Italian guy who learned it from the original owners. So they did some of the most like original ones. This is their original. This is the one that goes all the way back to Gems Spa.
Oh,
This is
wow.
their soda fountain that was there. They would still do the seltzer on tap, but their whole trick was that they would do it for you in a paper cup, so you get that nice frothy top here, and then
Wow.
you get the straw.
And where's that? Where's that?
Well, it was
Ah.
at St. Mark's and 2nd Avenue,
Ah.
and it closed during the pandemic. Now, it's kind of their own fault. Because in 2019, they were caught selling cigarettes to people who are underage.
Oh.
And so the government kind of clamped down on them on that one, and that was about 80% of their business. And once they lost that,
Oh, wow.
they were making it through the pandemic by merchandising and selling lots of newspapers and tons of egg creams. I went and got one just before everything closed down here in the city. And then, of course, pandemic hits, and that's the
Wow.
end. And the place closed, and they actually started selling off elements of the building because, you know, it's historic.
You should have bought the fountain.
Well, the fountain was for sale. This is it, when they took it down. They auctioned this one off, and I was trying to figure out who got it, because I have friends who work at the New York Historical Society, and they had put in a bid on it. And when I knew I was coming, I reached out to them to find out if they got it, and I haven't heard back. So fingers crossed, because I feel like this thing belongs in a museum, right? Absolutely. So, there's our meal for the week, all right? We started with Bloody Marys for breakfast at the 21 Club, starting the day off well. We got pastrami and rye over at Katz's. We had spaghetti and meatballs at Rayo's, where Thursday's gonna get us a reservation, and we ended with egg creams over at Gem Spa, which means I wanna know what you all are hungry for next week.
Yeah, what are we going to have next week?
Well, that's partially up to you. It's partially up to you. So I've got some ideas, but you tell me what you want.
Huh.
Anything? Any specific requests? What do you like?
Why
The
does
best
it
Middle
always
Eastern
have to
food
be
in New
me?
York.
It doesn't have to be you. I just like you.
Thank you. Okay, well, that one with the pink beef,
Yeah, the pastrami.
yes, thank you.
All right. Well, we'll put it in an order for that one then for
Okay,
you.
that's first.
Yes. Okay.
Well, I must say, sir,
Mhm.
you gave us quite a story.
Well, thank you. I'm glad
You could
you.
make a movie.
Oh, don't
Don't tempt him.
don't tempt me because I will for you.
What about cheesecake?
Well, yeah, we have to do cheesecake, right? Yeah. And where do you think I'm getting cheesecake?
Juniors.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's too creamy. Too creamy.
Or little red hens, which
A little-
is great.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, cheesecake is our request for next week, it sounds like. So come back for cheesecake, I guess.
They make it in Brooklyn.